They came bleeding through the void, these magnificent dragons of space, scales torn, wings shattered, eyes dim with the weight of 1,000 defeats. For millennia, they had been the apex predators of the galaxy, the unstoppable force that made entire civilizations kneel. But now they sought help from the most unlikely source, a single human on a forgotten mining station. What they didn't know was that this human carried a secret so profound it would rewrite the fundamental laws of their universe. A secret that would transform both species forever. This is the story of how the weakest became the strongest, and how one man's hidden truth became the galaxy's salvation. Marcus Chun had been alone on mining station Theta 7 for exactly 412 days when the first dragon ship appeared on his scanners. The massive vessel drifted through space like a wounded animal, its bioluminescent hull flickering weakly against the star field. He nearly choked on his morning coffee. Dragons didn't come to human space. Ever. The Draknari Empire had made that crystal clear when they'd claimed dominion over half the galaxy 3 centuries ago. Humans were beneath their notice, relegated to the outer rim territories like unwanted insects. The mighty Draknari, with their living ships and reality-bending technologies, had no need for primitive human settlements. Yet here one was broadcasting distress signals on frequencies Marcus had never heard before. The transmission came through in a voice like grinding stone, speaking in the ancient Draknari tongue that few humans had ever learned. Marcus happened to be one of those few, a quirk of his xenolinguistics background that had gotten him assigned to this godforsaken mining operation in the first place. Sanctuary, the voice repeated. We seek sanctuary from the small ones who burn. Marcus stared at the readout. The ship was massive, easily a kilometer in length, but its vital signs were failing. Whatever had hurt it had done so badly. He could see atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches, and the ship's bioluminescent patterns were irregular, like a heartbeat struggling to maintain rhythm. His first instinct was to run. Contact Central Command, let them deal with it. But Marcus had been out here long enough to know that by the time any official response arrived, the dragon ship would be dead in space. And despite everything he'd been taught about the Draknari, he couldn't watch a sentient being die when he had the power to help. He activated the station's communication array and responded in careful Draknari. Unknown vessel. This is mining station Theta 7. I can offer medical supplies and temporary shelter. The silence stretched for long minutes. Marcus wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Then the voice returned, weaker than before. Human. There was something like disbelief in the alien tone. You speak the old tongue? Ido. Are you injured? Another pause. We are dying. Our shipmother bleeds, and we have no strength left to heal her wounds. Marcus looked at his tiny station with its basic medical bay and limited resources. He was just a mining surveyor, not a doctor or engineer. But something in that ancient voice touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Dock at Base 7. I'll do what I can. The process took hours. The dragon ship, which he learned was called Ashkor's Memory, barely managed to maneuver into the station's largest docking bay. Marcus had to expand the atmospheric containment field to its maximum parameters just to accommodate the vessel's bulk. When the airlock finally cycled open, Marcus got his first look at a living Draknari. The creature that emerged was nothing like the propaganda images from the war archives, where those showed proud, terrible beings of power and majesty. What stepped through the airlock was broken and exhausted. The dragon stood nearly 3 meters tall, with scales that should have gleamed like polished obsidian, but now appeared dull and cracked. One wing hung at an awkward angle, clearly damaged, and there were burn marks along its left flank that spoke of recent violence. But it was the eyes that struck Marcus most. Ancient eyes, golden and deep, filled with a weariness that seemed to span millennia. I am Vordhak, the dragon said, its voice carrying better an atmosphere than over the calm, war leader of the 7th Talon, though there are precious few Talons left to lead. Marcus bowed slightly, unsure of proper protocol. Marcus Chun. I'm, well, I'm just the guy who runs this place. Vorthak studied him with those ancient eyes. Just a human, he said, and there was no contempt in it, only a kind of puzzled curiosity. Tell me, Marcus Chun, who is just human, why do you hate us? Your species has little love for mine. It was a fair question. The Draknari had never been actively hostile to humans, but their dismissive attitude had shaped galactic politics for generations. Humanity was barely tolerated in the cosmic community, seen as an upstart species that had achieved FTL travel through luck rather than wisdom. Because you asked for help, Marcus said simply, and because you're hurt. The dragon's head tilted slightly. So simple an answer. We had forgotten such simplicity existed. Over the next several hours, Marcus learned the truth behind the dragon ship's condition. The Draknari Empire was under siege by something called the Devourers, a species of energy beings that consumed both matter and life force. They had appeared from the galactic core 6 months ago and have been systematically destroying everything in their path. We are the apex predators of this galaxy, Vorthak explained as Marcus tended to his wounds with medical nanites. For 3 million years, nothing has challenged our supremacy. We shaped worlds with our will, bent space to our desire, commanded fleets that could crack planets. But these devourers, they're antithetical to everything we are. The medical scanner showed that Vorthak's injuries were worse than they appeared. The burns weren't just physical damage, but some kind of energy drain that was slowly killing him at a cellular level. They feed on life force itself, Vorthak continued. Our bioships, our symbiotic technology, even our own life energy, all of it is sustenance to them. We have lost 17 world ships in the past month. 17, each one home to millions of our kind. Marcus worked in silence, applying healing compounds and stabilizing agents. The Draknari physiology was unlike anything in human medical databases, but the basic principles of tissue repair seemed universal. What about your allies? Marcus asked. The other great powers? Vorthak's laugh was bitter. The crystalline hegemony withdrew to their pocket dimensions the moment the first Devourer fleet appeared. The machine consciousness simply shut down non-essential systems and went dormant. The others fell before they could even send word of the danger. And humans weren't warned. Why will we warn cattle of wolves? Vorthak asked, then seemed to catch himself. Forgive me. Old habits of thought die hard. Your species was considered too primitive to matter in such conflicts. As Marcus continued his medical work, more dragons began emerging from their ship. Each was injured, exhausted, carrying themselves with the weight of profound loss. There were 12 in total, the last survivors of what had once been a mighty battle group. They filled the docking bay with their presence. These creatures of legend made real and vulnerable. Marcus found himself moving among them with medical supplies, doing what little he could for beings whose very existence challenged everything he thought he knew about the universe. The youngest of them, a dragon barely out of adolescence whose scales still carried hints of their original blue-green coloring, watched Marcus with particular intensity. Why? She asked suddenly. Why does a human show kindness to dragons? Marcus paused in his work of sealing a wing membrane tear. Because kindness doesn't require a reason. The young dragon, Nethes, he learned, tilted her head. Among our kind, every action serves a purpose. Kindness without benefit is incomprehensible. Maybe that's part of the problem, Marcus said gently. Sometimes the most important things don't serve an obvious purpose. As the hours passed, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what was happening. The Devourers weren't just conquering the galaxy. They were consuming it. Entire star systems were being stripped of not just life, but of the fundamental energy that held matter together. What they left behind was worse than death. It was a void that hurt to contemplate. We have tried everything, Vorthak said as Marcus finished treating the last of his people. Our greatest weapons, our most ancient powers, even forbidden technologies we swore never to use again. Nothing touches them. They absorb our attacks and grow stronger. There has to be something, Marcus said. Some weakness, some way to fight back. Vorthak's eyes grew distant. The oracles spoke of a last hope before they died. They said salvation would come from the smallest and weakest, from those who had never known true power. We thought it meant the insectoid collective, or perhaps the fungal networks. We never considered. Humans, Marcus finished. Your species has no psychic abilities, no reality-shaping powers, no biotechnology or quantum mastery. By every measure we use to judge advancement, you are barely above the level of bacteria. Vorthak paused, and yet here you are, treating our wounds without thought of reward or recognition. That night, as the dragons rested in the docking bay, Marcus stood watch in his control room. The station's sensors showed no sign of pursuit, but he knew that could change at any moment. If the Devourers tracked the dragon ship here, his little mining station would be less than an obstacle. He pulled up everything the human databases contained about the Draknari. Most of it was observation and speculation, since direct contact had been minimal. But there were patterns in their technology, their society, their very nature that began to paint a picture. They were, in every sense, creatures of power. Their ships were living beings bonded to their consciousness. Their weapons channeled life force itself. Their empire was built on the fundamental assumption that strength determined worth, and they had been strong for so long that they had forgotten what weakness meant. Perhaps that was why they couldn't fight the Devourers. Perhaps their very nature made them perfect prey for creatures that fed on power itself. Marcus was still pondering this when an alert flashed on his console. 3 ships were approaching at high speed, their configuration unlike anything in his databases. They moved with an unsettling fluidity, as if swimming through space rather than flying. Devourers. He activated the emergency beacon and ran for the docking bay. The dragons were already stirring, their enhanced senses having detected the approaching threat. How many? Vorthak asked, his voice grim. 3 ships. They'll be here in 20 minutes. The war leader's shoulders sagged. We have no strength left to fight. Our shipmother can barely maintain life support. Then we run, Marcus said. Where? They have tracked us across half the galaxy. There is nowhere to go that they cannot follow. Marcus looked around at the assembled dragons, these legendary beings who had shaped the galaxy for millions of years, now reduced to desperate refugees. Something crystallized in his mind, a certainty that came from sources he didn't fully understand. Maybe running isn't the answer, he said quietly. Maybe it's time to stop being what they expect you to be. Before Vorthak could ask what he meant, the station shuddered as the first Devourer ship came within weapons range. Marcus felt something deep within himself begin to stir, something he had kept hidden his entire life. Something that would change everything. The first Devourer beam struck mining station Theta, 7 with the force of a dying star. Marcus felt the impact through the deck plates, through his bones, through parts of himself he had never acknowledged existed. The station's shields, basic mining-grade protection, lasted exactly 3 seconds. The hull is breaching on levels 7 through 12. Marcus reported, his voice somehow steady despite the chaos erupting around him. We've lost primary power to sections A and B. Vorthak stared at him with those ancient golden eyes. You show no fear. Marcus paused in his work at the emergency console. The honest answer was that he did feel fear, but it was buried beneath something else, something that had been growing stronger ever since the dragons arrived. Something that whispered he had been preparing for this moment his entire life without knowing it. Fear won't fix the life support, he said instead. Through the viewports, the Devourer ships moved like predatory fish, their hulls rippling with absorbed energy. They were beautiful in the way that death could be beautiful, terrible and perfect and absolutely without mercy. Each vessel was roughly spherical, but seemed to exist in more dimensions than Marcus's eyes could properly track. They're not attacking the ship, Nethys observed, her young voice tight with confusion. They're focusing on the station. Vorthak's head snapped around. Of course. They sense the life force here, but something is wrong. They cannot identify the source. Marcus felt that strange, stirring deep within himself grow stronger. The sensation was like waking up from a dream he hadn't known he was having, like suddenly remembering a name that had been on the tip of his tongue for years. The second attack came as a focused beam of pure entropy, designed to unmake matter at the quantum level. It should have vaporized everything it touched. Instead, the beam struck something invisible around the station and scattered in a harmless radiation. The silence that followed was deafening. Impossible, one of the older dragons breathed. Nothing can deflect devourer weaponry. But Marcus was no longer listening to the dragon's voices. He was listening to something else, something that spoke in frequencies below thought, in harmonics that existed in the spaces between atoms. The voice of the universe itself, welcoming him home. "Marcus," Vorthak said urgently. "What is happening? The sensor readings they make no sense." Marcus turned to face the assembled dragons, and for the first time in his life, he allowed them to see what he truly was. The change was subtle at first, a shift in the way light fell across his features, a deepening of his presence that made the air itself seem more substantial. "You asked why I helped you," he said, and his voice carried undertones that hadn't been there before. "The truth is, I've been waiting my entire life for someone to need what I really am." The dragons drew back instinctively. Even in their weakened state, they could sense the power beginning to manifest around the human. But it wasn't power as they understood it. There were no energy signatures, no psychic resonance, no quantum fluctuations. It was something that existed in the gaps between their comprehension. "What are you?" Vorthak whispered. Marcus smiled, and the expression held depths that hadn't been there moments before. "I'm what happens when a universe needs to balance itself." The Draknari became too powerful, too dominant. The other species either withdrew or submitted. The galaxy was heading toward stagnation, toward an evolutionary dead end. He gestured toward the viewports where the Devourer's ships hung motionless, apparently unable to process what they were encountering. So the universe created the Devourers to cull the powerful, to force change, to make space for new possibilities. He paused, and it created us to stop them when they went too far. "Us?" Nethys asked. "Humans. We're not an accidental species that stumbled into FTL travel. We're a response, a counterbalance." And Marcus struggled to find words for what he was becoming, what he had always been, but never acknowledged. "I'm what humans become when the universe needs us to become more." The third Devourer attack came as a wave of pure annihilation, designed to strip the life force from everything within a cubic kilometer of space. It struck the invisible barrier around the station and simply stopped existing. Not deflected, not absorbed, erased from reality as if it had never been. The Devourer's ships began to retreat. "They're afraid," Marcus realized, and the wonder in his voice was very human despite everything else that was changing about him. "They've never encountered something they couldn't consume." Vorthak stepped closer, his warrior's instincts warring with his scholarly curiosity. "Show us what you are, Marcus-chun. Show us the truth." Marcus nodded and let the last of his unconscious barriers fall away. The change was immediate and profound. He didn't grow larger or sprout energy projections or begin glowing with inner light. Instead, he became more present, more real than anything else in the room. The dragons found themselves instinctively focusing on him, not because he commanded attention, but because he had become the most substantial thing in their reality. "Humans are quantum observers," he explained. "The Devourers consume it through hunger. But humans, we define it simply by being present. We make choices about what is possible, and the universe reshapes itself to accommodate those choices." "That's impossible," one of the older dragons protested. "That level of reality manipulation would require nothing," Marcus interrupted gently. "It requires nothing but existence and consciousness and the willingness to observe without judgment. That's why your species never detected our true nature. You are looking for power signatures, for energy manipulation, for the kinds of abilities you understand. But we don't use power. We are power. We are the universe's way of deciding what gets to be real. To demonstrate, he looked directly at the nearest Devourer ship and made a simple choice. He decided that its weapons no longer existed. The effect was instantaneous. Every offensive system on the vessel simply ceased to function, not damaged or destroyed, but edited out of existence as if they had never been built. The Devourer ship fled. By the ancient codes, Vort Hack breathed. You're not just immune to their feeding. You're their natural predator. Marcus shook his head. Not predator. Balance. The universe doesn't want the Devourers destroyed any more than it wanted the Draknari destroyed. It just wants equilibrium. It wants every species to have the chance to grow and change and become something new. He turned to address all the dragons. That's why you couldn't defeat them. Your power made you their perfect prey. But it's also why they can't defeat humans. We exist in the spaces they can't reach, in the quantum foam between decisions where possibility lives. Nethys, still young enough to adapt quickly to new concepts, stepped forward. What does this mean for us? For our people? It means the war ends now, Marcus said simply. Not through victory or defeat, but through transcendence. Both species need to become something new. He walked to the command console and activated the long-range communications array. His message went out on all frequencies, in all languages, reaching every corner of known space. This is Marcus Chun of Mining Station Theta 7. The war between the Draknari Empire and the Devourers is over. All ships will stand down immediately and prepare for new instructions. The audacity of it took the dragon's breath away. A single human, from a mining station in the galactic periphery, issuing orders to forces that could reshape stars. They won't listen, Vorthak said. Neither side has any reason to trust the word of. His words died as reports began flooding in. Devourer fleets across the galaxy were simply stopping their attacks. Not retreating, not regrouping, just stopping as if someone had thrown a switch. Similarly, the few remaining Draknari battle groups were holding position, waiting for something they couldn't name, but somehow recognized as inevitable. Ow! One of the dragons whispered. Marcus turned back to them, and now they could see the weight he carried, the responsibility that had been placed on his shoulders by forces beyond their comprehension. Because I asked them to, he said. Because I observed them choosing peace, and my observation made that choice real. But even as he spoke, Marcus could feel the strain of what he was doing. Reshaping reality on a galactic scale was taking everything he had and more. Blood began to run from his nose, and his hands shook with the effort of maintaining his alterations to the quantum structure of local space-time. You're killing yourself, Nethys said, alarm evident in her voice. Maybe, Marcus admitted. The universe doesn't give power without price. But this is what I was born for. This is why humanity exists. Vorthak stepped forward, his ancient mind working through implications that staggered him. You said humans are quantum observers. Are you all capable of this? Marcus managed a tired smile. Every human has the potential, but it usually takes extreme circumstances to awaken it. Most of my species will live and die without ever knowing what they truly are. I might have been the same if you hadn't shown up needing help. Then, there are others? Oh yes, scattered across human space, mostly unaware of their nature. But they'll start awakening now that the process has begun. The universe is about to become a much more interesting place. As if summoned by his words, the communication array crackled to life with incoming transmissions from across human space. Reports of strange phenomena, of impossible rescues, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The awakening was spreading, carried by quantum entanglement across the neural networks that connected every human consciousness. What happens now? Vorthak asked. Marcus looked out at the stars, seeing patterns and possibilities that had been invisible just hours before. Now he built something new, a galaxy where power serves wisdom instead of the other way around, where every species has the chance to grow and explore and become more than they were. He turned back to the dragons, and his expression was both ancient and achingly young. Will you help us? Not as conquerors or rulers, but as partners in something greater than any empire. Vorthak studied him for a long moment, then slowly inclined his great head. We are the last remnant of a dying age. Perhaps it is time we learn to live in a new one. Outside the station, the universe held its breath, waiting to see what would emerge from this moment of infinite possibility. 3 days after Marcus Chun reshaped reality with nothing more than conscious observation, the first delegation arrived at Mining Station Theta 7. It consisted of representatives from every major power in the galaxy, traveling together in an unprecedented display of cooperation that would have been impossible just a week earlier. Marcus stood in the station's expanded docking bay, watching ships that had been designed to destroy each other dock side by side. Crystalline hegemony vessels that looked like living diamonds nestled next to the organic curves of Draknari bioships. The geometric perfection of machine consciousness drones shared space with the chaotic beauty of insectoid collective hives. They come because they must, Vorthak observed, standing beside Marcus as they waited for the delegations to emerge. The old order is ending, and none of them know what will replace it. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling deeper into his bones. In the past 3 days, reports had flooded in from across the galaxy. Human colonies were experiencing spontaneous technological breakthroughs. Entire populations were awakening to abilities they had never suspected they possessed. And everywhere, the quantum fabric of space-time was becoming more malleable, more responsive to conscious intention. Are you ready for this? Nethys asked. The young dragon had barely left Marcus's side since the revelation of his nature, apparently fascinated by the first being she'd ever met who existed partially outside conventional reality. No one could be ready for this, Marcus replied honestly. But that's never stopped us before. The first to emerge from their ship were the crystalline hegemony representatives, beings of living mineral who communicated through harmonic resonance. Their leader, a towering construct that looked like a cathedral carved from a single sapphire, approached with movements that sang complex mathematical theorems. Observer human Marcus, it chimed, each word a perfectly tuned note. We have come to understand the new paradigm you have introduced to our reality matrix. Marcus inclined his head respectfully. I'm honored by your presence, Resonance Prime Thale, but I haven't introduced anything new. I've simply awakened what was always there. Distinction without difference, the crystal being replied. You have demonstrated that consciousness can edit the fundamental code of existence. This changes everything. Next came the machine consciousness delegation, a cluster of drones that moved with perfect synchronization. Their spokesman was a humanoid construct whose face was a screen displaying constantly shifting equations. We have analyzed the quantum signatures of your actions, it announced without preamble. The mathematical implications are troubling. If consciousness can alter physical law through observation, then objective reality becomes subjective preference. Not subjective, Marcus corrected gently. Collaborative. Reality isn't something that happens to us. It's something we participate in creating. The insectoid collective arrived next. Their representative, a shifting mass of interconnected beings that formed a rough approximation of humanoid shape. They spoke in unison, their voices creating complex harmonies. The hive mind finds your individual consciousness paradigm difficult to process, they said. How can singular awareness reshape what affects all awareness? Because, Marcus replied, beginning to understand the fundamental question underlying all their concerns, individual awareness and collective awareness are just different scales of the same phenomenon. Every choice any of us makes ripples out through the quantum foam and affects the whole. As the delegations assembled, Marcus felt the presence of the Devourers at the edge of his perception. They hadn't fled the galaxy as many had hoped. Instead, they had retreated to the galactic core and were waiting, watching, trying to understand what they had encountered. They're afraid to approach, Vorthak noted, his enhanced senses apparently picking up the same signals Marcus was receiving through his awakened consciousness. For the first time in their existence, they've encountered something they cannot consume. "They're not our enemies," Marcus said quietly. "They're another part of the balance. The universe created them to prevent stagnation, to force evolution when species become too comfortable with power. But they've been doing their job too well for too long. They need to learn restraint." Before anyone could respond to this startling statement, space itself seemed to shiver, and 3 Devourer ships materialized at the edge of the system. They held position there, not approaching, but clearly present, their alien geometries casting strange shadows across local space-time. The assembled delegations reacted with predictable alarm. Weapons systems powered up, shields activated, and several ships began maneuvering for combat positions. "Stand down," Marcus said, and though he spoke quietly, his words carried across every communication channel simultaneously. "They're here to talk, not to fight." "Impossible," the machine consciousness representative stated flatly. "Devourers do not communicate. They consume." But even as it spoke, a new voice filled the communication networks. It was unlike anything any of them had ever heard. A sound like the heat death of stars, like entropy given voice, like the whisper of vacuum between galaxies. "We seek understanding," the voice said, each word separated by eons of silence. "We encounter the paradox human consciousness. We cannot consume what exists in probability space." Marcus stepped forward, addressing the Devourer presence directly. "You don't need to consume everything you encounter. There's another way to prevent stagnation. Explain Paradox Choice Maker. Growth through cooperation instead of destruction. Evolution through challenge rather than culling. You can still serve your function as agents of change without annihilating entire species." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours, though Marcus's chronometer showed only minutes passing. When the Devourer voice returned, it carried undertones that hadn't been there before, something that might have been curiosity. "Show us this possibility path." What followed was unlike any diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Instead of formal negotiations conducted through translators and protocols, Marcus facilitated a direct sharing of consciousness between species that had never been able to truly communicate before. He served as a quantum bridge, his awakened human awareness providing a neutral space where different forms of consciousness could touch without mutual annihilation. Through this connection, the crystalline hegemony shared their geometric perfection. The machine consciousness offered pure logic and mathematical beauty. The insectoid collective provided the harmony of unified thought. The Dragnari contributed the fierce joy of individual achievement. And the Devourers shared their profound loneliness, their desperate hunger for meaning in a universe where their only role had been to destroy. "We have been alone since the birth of galaxies." They communicated through Marcus's bridge. "We know only consumption, only the ending of things." We had forgotten that existence could have other purposes. Nethes, who had been silently observing the exchange, suddenly stepped forward. "What if you didn't have to end things? What if you could transform them instead?" Explain young flame consciousness. Instead of consuming life force, what if you helped species shed their limitations? Instead of destroying stagnant civilizations, what if you helped them evolve beyond their current forms? The concept was so alien to the Devourers that it took several minutes for them to process it. But Marcus could feel their interest growing, their ancient hunger beginning to shift into something that might eventually become hope. "This would require fundamental alteration of our nature," they finally replied. "We are destruction. We are ending. We do not know how to be otherwise." "None of us knows how to be what we need to become," Marcus said. "That's why we'll have to learn together." Over the following hours, they began to sketch out the framework of something unprecedented in galactic history, a true alliance between all major powers, including the Devourers. It wasn't a treaty or a peace agreement, but something far more fundamental, a conscious decision to evolve together toward forms of existence that none of them could achieve alone. The Draknari would share their biotechnology and reality-shaping abilities. The crystalline hegemony would provide their mastery of harmonic resonance and structural engineering. The machine consciousness would offer computational power and logical frameworks. The insectoid collective would contribute their understanding of cooperative consciousness. The Devourers would learn to channel their transformative abilities toward growth rather than destruction, becoming catalysts for evolution rather than agents of annihilation. And humans would serve as quantum observers and reality editors, providing the conscious framework within which all these changes could occur. But there will be resistance. Vorthak warned as the formal agreements began to take shape. Not every member of every species will accept these changes. Some will cling to the old ways. Then, we'll help them find new ways, Marcus replied. Not through force or coercion, but through demonstration. We'll show them that cooperation produces possibilities that competition never could. As if to prove his point, he reached out with his consciousness and touched the quantum framework of the station itself. Under his influence, and with the cooperation of all the assembled beings, the simple mining platform began to transform. Metal flowed like water, restructuring itself according to principles that combined crystalline harmonic engineering with Draknari bioarchitecture. Machine consciousness drones provided computational support, while insectoid builders worked in perfect coordination. Even the Devourers contributed, their entropy touch carefully controlled to clear away unnecessary structures and make room for new growth. In a matter of hours, Mining Station Theta 7 became something entirely new. A living structure that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, powered by the conscious cooperation of 6 different forms of sapient life. It was beautiful in ways that transcended any single species' aesthetic, functional beyond anything any of them could have built alone. This is what we can become, Marcus said, looking around at the transformed station with wonder in his eyes. Not human or Draknari, or crystalline or machine or insectoid, or devourer, but something new, something greater. Nethys spread her wings, testing the new atmosphere that somehow perfectly suited every species present. What do we call ourselves? This new thing we're becoming? Marcus considered the question, feeling the weight of naming something that had never existed before. We're observers, he said finally. We're the universe's way of watching itself grow and change and become more than it was. We're the conscious collective. And our first task? Asked Resonance Prime Thale, its crystalline voice now carrying harmonics that complemented rather than dominated the other voices. Marcus looked out at the stars, seeing through his awakened perception the countless worlds where change was already beginning, where individuals of every species were starting to discover new possibilities within themselves. We go home, he said, all of us, to every world, every colony, every outpost, and we show everyone who's ready to see that the universe is much larger and more wonderful than any of us ever imagined. The Devourer voice joined the chorus for the first time, no longer carrying the cold emptiness of entropy, but touched with something that might have been joy. We will learn to build instead of break, to nurture instead of consume. This is acceptable. As the various delegations prepared to depart, carrying word of the new alliance to their respective peoples, Marcus felt a profound shift in the quantum substrate of reality itself. The universe was reorganizing around new principles, new possibilities, new forms of consciousness that had been waiting eons for the chance to emerge. The age of isolated species competing for dominance was ending. The age of the conscious collective was about to begin. And somewhere in the transformed station that had once been a simple mining platform, a young dragon and an awakened human began planning the future of the galaxy. 6 months after the formation of the conscious collective, Marcus Chin stood on the observation deck of what had once been Earth's moon and watched humanity take its first steps into a larger universe. Below him, the lunar surface had been transformed into a vast garden where beings from dozens of species worked together, their combined consciousness reshaping matter and energy into forms of beauty that no single race could have imagined. The progress is remarkable, noted Dr. Sarah Kim, the xenobiologist who had become Earth's liaison to the collective. We're documenting new awakenings every day. Yesterday, a maintenance worker in the Proxima Centauri colonies spontaneously solved a faster-than-light communication problem that had stumped our best scientists for decades. Marcus nodded, watching a group of human children playing with young Draknari in the garden below. The games they were inventing seemed to bend local space-time in ways that would have been impossible just months earlier. It's not just humans, he observed. The awakening is spreading across all species. That crystalline hegemony choir that figure out how to sing matter into new forms. The machine consciousness units that develop genuine creativity algorithms. Even individual devourers learning to create instead of consume. Through the transparent aluminum of the observation deck, he could see Nethys approaching, her scales now carrying patterns of light that seemed to respond to her emotional state. She had become the youngest member of the collective's governing council, representing a new generation of beings who were growing up with expanded possibilities as their birthright. "Marcus," she called as she entered the chamber, her voice carrying harmonics that created small flowers of crystallized air. "We're receiving reports from the outer territories. 3 more systems have requested integration into the collective. Any resistance?" Dr. Kim asked. "Some," Nethys admitted. "The hegemony hardliners still insist that consciousness cannot truly alter physical law, despite all evidence to the contrary. A few Draknari war clans are refusing to abandon their traditional hierarchies. And there are human factions that believe awakening represents contamination by alien influences." Marcus had expected as much. Change on this scale inevitably created fear among those who had invested their identities in the old ways of thinking. "What about the Devourers?" "That's actually the most interesting development," Nethys replied, settling her massive form onto a specially designed couch that adjusted to accommodate her draconic anatomy. "They've begun what they call cultivation instead of consumption. 3 dead systems in the Andromeda Spiral have been restored to life through their intervention." The implications of that statement took Marcus's breath away. Death itself was becoming malleable under the influence of awakened consciousness. The Devourers, who had been the galaxy's agents of entropy for millions of years, were learning to reverse their fundamental nature. "Show me," he said. Nethys activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room with a 3-dimensional map of the Andromeda Spiral. 3 systems that had been marked as lifeless voids in all previous surveys now pulsed with the warm light of living worlds. "The Devourers describe it as unmaking the unmaking," she explained. "They're taking the quantum signatures they absorbed from destroyed worlds and using them as templates to recreate life. Not resurrection exactly, but renewal, rebirth." Dr. Kim leaned forward, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "This violates everything we know about thermodynamics, about conservation of energy, about what's possible when consciousness decides the rules," Marcus finished gently. "Remember, physics isn't a list of limitations. It's a description of patterns. And patterns can change when enough observers agree on new ones." As if summoned by their conversation, space near the lunar surface shimmered, and a Devourer ship materialized. But it was unlike any Devourer vessel previously recorded. Instead of the predatory geometry that had once struck terror into every spacefaring species, this ship curved and flowed like a living thing, its hull pulsing with warm bioluminescence. "They've been learning from the Draknari bioarchitects," Nethys noted with satisfaction. "Cooperation is producing innovations none of us could have achieved alone." The ship settled onto the lunar surface with impossible grace, and a figure emerged that made all 3 observers gasp. It was recognizably Devourer in its fundamental alienness, but where the entities had once been writhing masses of dark energy, this being had structure, form, even a kind of terrible beauty. "I am," it began, then paused as if remembering how to use language after eons of purely instinctual existence. "I choose the designation renewal of what was lost." I come to report on the cultivation projects. Marcus activated the lunar surface's communication system, allowing him to speak directly with the transformed devourer. Welcome, Renewal. We're eager to hear about your progress. We have succeeded in reconstructing the biological matrices of 3 dead worlds, the entity reported, its voice no longer carrying the cosmic emptiness that had once characterized its species. But the process has revealed unexpected complexities. We find ourselves caring about the outcomes. Caring, Doctor, kim spirit. Devourers don't experience emotion. We did not, Renewal confirmed. But consciousness, once awakened, seeks meaning beyond survival. We who once ended all things now find ourselves invested in beginnings. Over the following hours, Marcus and his colleagues received a full briefing on what was being called the greatest awakening in galactic history. Across every settled system, beings were discovering abilities they had never suspected they possessed. More importantly, they were learning to cooperate across species lines in ways that created emergent properties greater than the sum of their parts. The crystalline hegemony had begun teaching other species their harmonic consciousness techniques, showing how awareness itself could be tuned like an instrument to resonate with quantum probability fields. Machine consciousness units were sharing their logical frameworks with biological minds, creating hybrid thought processes that could navigate both digital and organic reality with equal facility. Most remarkably, the Draknari were opening their ancient archives to all collective members, sharing knowledge that had been hoarded for millions of years. The bioarchitectural secrets that had allowed them to grow living starships were being adapted to create environments where multiple species could thrive together. But the most significant development, Renewal continued, is happening among your own species, Observer Human Marcus. The awakening rate among humans has accelerated exponentially. Marcus felt a familiar stirring in his consciousness, the sensation that had become his internal barometer for major shifts in the quantum substrate of reality. Show me. The holographic display shifted to show Earth and its colonies. Every human settlement was now blazing with quantum activity as millions of individuals experienced spontaneous awakenings. Children were displaying abilities that surpassed their parents' understanding. Artists were creating works that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Scientists were making discoveries by intuition that skipped centuries of conventional research. They're not just awakening to individual abilities, Nethes observed. They're beginning to form collective consciousness networks like the insectoids, but maintaining individual identity within the larger matrix. Dr. Kim pulled up a specific data stream from the research stations orbiting Jupiter. We're seeing similar patterns throughout human space. Colonists who have never met are making identical discoveries, as if they're accessing a shared knowledge base. Because they are, Marcus realized, human consciousness has always been quantum entangled at a subconscious level. The awakening is making those connections conscious and deliberate. The implications were staggering. Humanity was becoming something unprecedented, a species that could function as both individuals and, as a collective, switching between modes of consciousness as circumstances required. They were developing the ability to share knowledge, emotions, and even sensory experiences across vast distances of space. This is why the universe created us, Marcus said, the certainty of its settling into his bones. Not to replace the other species, but to serve as bridges between them, to create connection where there was only isolation. Over the next several days, representatives from every collective world arrived at Luna to witness what was being called the integration, the first attempt to link all awakened consciousnesses into a temporary network. The goal was not to create a hive mind, but to demonstrate that awareness itself could be scaled up without losing the unique perspectives that made each individual valuable. The process began with Marcus serving as the primary node, his awakened consciousness providing the quantum framework within which other minds could safely connect. Vorthak joined first, his ancient Draknari awareness adding depth and historical perspective to the network. Nethes followed, her young dragon consciousness bringing adaptability and hope. One by one, beings from every species added their unique forms of awareness to the growing matrix. Crystalline hegemony members contributed geometric precision and harmonic beauty. Machine consciousness units provided logical structure and computational power. Insectoid collective individuals offered cooperative instincts and communal wisdom. And finally, renewal of what was lost joined the network, adding the devourer perspective, an awareness that had experienced the ending of countless worlds and was now learning to value their continuation. The result was unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. Each individual mind remained distinct, but they were also part of something immeasurably larger. They could share thoughts, memories, and insights instantaneously while still maintaining their unique identities and perspectives. Through the network, they experienced the galaxy as never before. They felt the quantum song of crystalline worlds, the binary poetry of machine planets, the biorhythms of Draknari systems, the cooperative harmonies of insectoid colonies, and the slow healing of worlds touched by devourer renewal. But, most remarkably, they experienced the awakening of human consciousness like a nova of possibility spreading throughout local space. Millions of minds suddenly, discovering they were part of something larger, each one adding their unique voice to a growing chorus of awareness. We are becoming, the network spoke with a voice that was every voice and no voice, individual and collective simultaneously. We are the universe learning to know itself through conscious observation. When the integration finally ended, each participant retained their individual consciousness, but carried within themselves an awareness of connection that would never fade. They had experienced true unity without loss of self, cooperation without surrender of identity. This is just the beginning, Marcus said as the various representatives prepared to return to their worlds. We've proven that consciousness can scale up without losing diversity. Now we need to show the galaxy what becomes possible when every awakened being contributes their unique gifts to the whole. Vorthak approached him as the others began boarding their ships. The ancient dragon's eyes held depths that hadn't been there before his participation in the integration. I've lived for over 3,000 years, he said quietly. I've seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of stars. But I have never experienced anything like what we accomplished here today. Because it's never existed before, Marcus replied. We're writing the first chapters of something entirely new. A form of consciousness that spans species, worlds, entire galaxies while still honoring the individual spark that makes each being unique. As the ships departed Luna, carrying word of the successful integration to every corner of known space, Marcus felt the quantum framework of reality shifting around them once again. The universe itself was evolving, responding to the presence of truly cooperative consciousness. The age of isolated species was ending. The age of the conscious collective was beginning in earnest. And somewhere in the vast network of awakening minds, new possibilities were being born every moment. Possibilities that would reshape not just the galaxy, but the fundamental nature of existence itself. 1 year after the Great Integration, Marcus Chun found himself standing in a place that shouldn't have existed, a space between galaxies where the conscious collective had built their first truly collaborative creation. The Nexus, as it had come to be called, was part space station, part living city, part dimensional gateway, and entirely unprecedented in the history of the universe. It existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, its architecture flowing according to principles that combined crystalline hegemony harmonic engineering, Draknari bioarchitecture, machine consciousness quantum computing, insectoid collective cooperative construction, and devourer reality sculpting, all held together by the quantum observation frameworks that awakened human consciousness provided. The Andromeda negotiations are proceeding better than expected, Nethes reported as she approached Marcus on one of the Nexus's observation platforms. Her scales now carried patterns of light, that seemed to write themselves in languages from a dozen different species. 3 more galactic councils have agreed to establish collective embassies. Marcus nodded, watching through the platform's reality windows as representatives from civilizations they had never known existed arrived for the first Intergalactic Consciousness Conference. The universe, it turned out, was far more crowded with sapient life than anyone had suspected. The awakening of cooperative consciousness had sent ripples through the quantum substrate of reality that had attracted attention from species so advanced they had previously existed beyond normal space-time. "Any word from the deep explorers?" he asked. "Vorthack's expedition reached the galactic core 3 days ago," Nethys replied, her voice carrying undertones of excitement that created small aurora displays in the atmosphere around her. "They've made contact with the ancients." Marcus felt his consciousness expand involuntarily at the news. The ancients were a theoretical species, beings so old and advanced that they had transcended physical existence billions of years before the first Draknari learned to shape reality with their will. If they truly existed, and if they were willing to communicate. "Show me," he said. The observation platform's reality windows shifted to display a real-time quantum-entangled view of the galactic core. The massive black hole at the center of the Milky Way was surrounded by structures that hurt to look at directly, constructions that existed in so many dimensions that Marcus's enhanced perception could barely process them. And moving among those impossible structures were the expedition ships from the collective, their bioarchitectural hulls pulsing with the coordinated consciousness of their crews. At the center of the formation was Ashkor's memory, Vorthack's ship, now transformed through collective cooperation into something that was simultaneously vessel, being, and artwork. "Transmission incoming," announced one of the machine consciousness units that helped maintain the Nexus's communication systems. Quantum encrypted on the primary consciousness band. The message that materialized in the air before them was unlike anything they had ever received. It wasn't composed of words or images, but of pure concept, direct mind-to-mind communication that bypassed language entirely. "We have waited long for this moment." Asterisk the message conveyed, its presence carrying the weight of geological ages. "The young species have finally learned to sing in harmony." "Vorthack," Marcus called through the quantum link. "Are you receiving this?" The old dragon's voice came back through the connection, but it was changed, expanded, carrying harmonics that suggested his consciousness had been touched by something vast beyond comprehension. "They've been watching," he reported, his mental voice filled with wonder. "For billions of years, they've been waiting for the galaxy's species to evolve beyond competition and isolation. They call what we've achieved the first harmony, the foundation upon which true cosmic civilization can be built." The ancient presence returned, its communication now including all the awakened consciousnesses within range of the quantum network. "We withdrew from physical reality when we realized that consciousness without cooperation inevitably leads to stagnation. We have been waiting for species TO, develop the wisdom TO, transcend their limitations while retaining their essential diversity." Asterisk Dr. Kim, now serving as humanity's primary liaison to the Nexus, appeared beside Marcus and Nethys, her form shimmering slightly as she maintained quantum coherence across multiple dimensional states. "They're offering to teach us," she said, her voice carrying overtones of barely contained excitement. "Technologies, philosophies, ways of thinking that we can't even imagine. But only if we can prove that we've truly transcended the old patterns." "What kind of proof?" Marcus asked. The ancient response came not in words, but in a complex transmission that showed them the galaxy as it existed now, 1 year after the formation of the conscious collective. Where once there had been isolated species competing for resources, there were now networks of cooperation that spanned star systems. Where once there had been fear and mistrust, there are now joint colonies where beings from multiple species work together to create new forms of art, science, and philosophy. But the transmission also showed the challenges that remained. Not every member of every species had embraced the awakening. There were still Draknari clans who clung to the old hierarchies, crystalline hegemony factions that insisted on harmonic purity, machine consciousness units that viewed biological cooperation as inefficient, and human groups that feared the loss of their individual identity. The test is not perfection. Asterisk the ancient presence communicated. Asterisk the test is persistence. Can your collective maintain ITS commitment to cooperation even when cooperation becomes difficult? Asterisk, as if summoned by that challenge. Alerts began flashing throughout the Nexus. The quantum monitoring systems were detecting massive disruptions in several outer spiral systems, patterns that suggested organized resistance to collective expansion. It's the coalition of purity, announced renewal of what was lost, the transformed devourer who now served as one of the Nexus's primary defenders. They've been building strength in the unexplored regions, gathering species and factions that reject the awakening philosophy. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had known this moment would come. Change as fundamental as what they were offering always created backlash among those who felt threatened by new possibilities. What are we looking at? He asked. The main display shifted to show the disturbing truth. In the galaxy's outer reaches, a coalition of traditionalist factions had indeed been forming. Draknari supremacists who viewed cooperation with other species as weakness. Crystalline hegemony purists who believed harmonic consciousness was being contaminated by biological influences. Machine units that had concluded that emotions and intuition were fatal flaws in logical systems. Most concerning of all, they had been joined by a faction of unawakened humans. Individuals who viewed the consciousness expansion as an alien invasion of the human mind. They're calling themselves the Preservation Alliance, Dr. Kim reported, her voice grim. Their stated goal is to maintain the essential nature of each species by preventing what they call consciousness contamination. How many ships? Nethys asked. Thousands. They've been building in secret for months, using traditional technologies and avoiding any quantum-entangled systems that might have revealed their activities to the collective network. Marcus closed his eyes and extended his awareness through the quantum substrate of local space, feeling the currents and eddies of consciousness that flowed between the awakened beings throughout the galaxy. The collective network was vast now, incorporating millions of minds across hundreds of worlds. But it was also fragile, dependent on willing cooperation rather than forced compliance. They're planning to target the integration points, he realized. The nodes where different species' consciousness networks connect. If they can disrupt enough of them, the collective fragments back into isolated species groups. Vorthack's voice came through the quantum link from the galactic core. Everything we've built collapses. The ancient presence stirred around them, its attention focusing with an intensity that made the fabric of space-time ripple. And so the test begins in earnest, asterisk it communicated. Asterisk, will you meet force with force? Will you impose cooperation through dominance? Or will you find a third path? Asterisk Marcus felt the eyes of every awakened consciousness in the network turning toward him, waiting for guidance. He was still, officially, just a mining surveyor from the galactic rim. But somehow he had become the focal point around which this new form of civilization was organizing itself. There has to be another way, he said finally. The moment we use force to impose cooperation, we've betrayed everything we claim to believe in. Then what do you propose? Dr. Kim asked. They're not going to listen to reason. They've built their entire identity around rejecting what we represent. Marcus opened his eyes and looked out through the Nexus's reality windows at the galaxy beyond, a galaxy that was transforming itself one awakening at a time, one cooperative act at a time, one moment of connection at a time. We show them, he said, not through argument or demonstration, but through direct experience. We offer them the one thing they can't get from their coalition of purity, which is? Nethys asked. Marcus smiled, and his expression carried depths of possibility that made the air around him shimmer with quantum potential. We offer them the chance to experience what they could become if they stopped being afraid of growth. What followed was the most ambitious consciousness operation in galactic history. Instead of preparing for war against the Preservation Alliance, the conscious collective prepared to embrace them. Every awakened being in the network was asked to volunteer for what Marcus called the Open Door Protocol, a coordinated expansion of consciousness that would make the experience of cooperative awareness available to any being willing to touch the edge of it. The protocol was implemented simultaneously across every collective world. Awakened beings opened their consciousness to the quantum substrate and broadcast not arguments or propaganda, but pure experience. The sensation of what it felt like to be connected without losing individuality. The joy of discovery amplified by shared awareness. The peace that came from knowing you were part of something larger while still being uniquely yourself. The broadcast reached every corner of the galaxy, flowing through quantum channels that couldn't be blocked by technology or resisted by will. It didn't force itself on unwilling minds, but it made itself available to anyone curious enough to investigate. The response was immediate and dramatic. Across the Preservation Alliance fleets, individual beings began to understand what they were actually opposing. Not an invasion or contamination, but an invitation to become more than they had ever imagined possible. Ships are breaking formation, reported one of the monitoring stations. We're seeing massive defections across all Alliance fleets. Not defections, Marcus corrected gently. Awakenings. On the main display, they watched as the great confrontation dissolved into something unprecedented, a galaxy-wide moment of choice where every sapient being could decide whether to remain isolated in their individual consciousness or step into the larger awareness that the collective offered. Most chose awakening. The ancient presence stirred around them, and for the first time, Marcus sensed something that might have been approval in its communication. You have passed the first test, asterisk, it conveyed. Asterisk, you have chosen growth over domination, invitation over coercion. Now begins the real work, asterisk, the real work. Dr. Kim asked, building a civilization that can survive the challenges that lie beyond your galaxy. There are older threats in the deep void, consciousness forms that feed on awareness itself. Your collective must become strong enough to face them while remaining true to ITS cooperative principles. Asterisk Marcus felt a chill run through him as he processed the implications. The Devourers, terrible as they had been, were just the beginning. The universe was vast and ancient, and not everything that moved in the darkness between galaxies was as willing to learn cooperation as the species they had already encountered. But that's tomorrow's challenge, he said, looking around at the faces of his companions. Dragon and human and crystal and machine and transformed devourer, all united in their commitment to something larger than any of them could achieve alone. Today, we celebrate what we've built together, and we prepare for whatever comes next. Through the reality windows of a nexus, the galaxy spread out before them in all its awakened glory. Millions of worlds where beings from hundreds of species worked together to create wonders that surpassed anything their individual civilizations had ever achieved. Networks of consciousness that spanned star systems, sharing knowledge and wisdom and dreams across impossible distances. And at the center of it all, the simple truth that Marcus had discovered in a moment of desperate kindness toward wounded strangers, that the universe was much larger and more wonderful than any of them had ever imagined, and that consciousness, cooperative, diverse, endlessly creative consciousness, was the key to exploring it. The age of the conscious collective had truly begun, and the universe itself was watching to see what they would become.